in the end of 1988, when I was 10, I ended up going to, me and my siblings ended up going to foster care. Whole other story. But my brothers went to a different place, and my sister and I, we were dropped off at this lady's house, and in the middle of the night, just dropped off and left with her. And this is not so much about being in foster care. This was about an unexpected phone call. You see, a couple months into the foster care, living with this family, I got a phone call, and big deal for kids to get a phone call. I mean, it was for me, and thought it might be my mom or my grandma or maybe the social worker. They were usually the only people who would call, and they said, your dad was on the phone. I was like, great. You know, I'm running to the phone to talk to my dad. My mom and my dad had divorced. Keynote here is that we have more than one dad. And the man that I was thinking of was my little brother's father. There was a weird possibility that it might be my sister's father. What I did not expect was a strange voice on the phone, and it was my father. I didn't know his voice. I had never met him. He had separated from my mother back before I was born. My mother was 19, and her situation with him, pretty much the key important detail was that he was 16 at the time, and she left town, and so they had been together in Sacramento. I was born in Burbank. She went back to her mother and was living with her mom when I was born. My uncle once told me that he was there when my father talked to my mother across the street from our home, and he wouldn't even cross the street to look at me, and I was an infant on the front lawn. And he had a very negative view of my father. So I had never met him. I do know that I seen him in court when I was 6 for paternity tests. Proved that he was the father because he denied that he was my father, and he ended up having to pay child support. I remember his wife being pregnant, and so I didn't know the guy. I could not recognize his voice. I knew his name because my mom would tell me about him, but she's not reliable. I would say that. So he had been contacted because we were in foster care. Well, because I was in foster care, and he pays child support, and he is my father. They let him know that I was in foster care. See, he could get custody, right? He told me that he was coming for me. He was going to come get me. That he found out what I've been going through. And that he was so sorry. He told me that he didn't have much. But what he did have, he was going to share with me. So he's not wealthy. He had simple. But he was willing to share it. When he got off the phone, I was crying happy tears. I had been mistreated for a long time. I was in foster care. And I literally packed my things. I was ready. And then nothing happened. No other contact. Nobody came. No other phone calls. And that was it. And I wondered what happened. Heard later, apparently, that's about the time where he ended up having to go through a divorce. Never knew if it was because he had decided to come get me or not. That pushed his marriage over whatever line it was headed toward. Don't know if I was a contributing factor, but as a kid, you know, you always go there. I kind of knew where he lived, vaguely. He was Sacramento. I knew he worked in the Air Force Base. McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento. It's closed now. My uncle in Sacramento worked in the same place. So I was visiting my cousin when I was 17. You know, this is like 95. And I tell my uncle about my father, how he works at the same base. And he goes, "What's his name?" My uncle looks him up on the base. Found out where he worked. Then one day he took me to work with him. And I went on my merry way and found where he worked. And I met his boss. And told him I was looking for my father's name. And they didn't know him by that name because he goes by a nickname. And so he said, "Hold on, wait here." And so he went and he got my father. Never seen this man. I recognized him immediately. And I guess he was expecting one of his other kids. He has 2 daughters. Maybe he was thinking one of them were waiting for him. He was not expecting me. His boss introduced him to me and gave him the rest of the day off and told him not to come in the next day. So he had the next day off. And my father was face to face with me. He took me to pizza. I went around with him. I told him a little bit about my life. I was an angry teenager. I mean, I knew that he didn't want anything to do with me growing up. I mean, no contact at all. But he had called me and told me he was coming. And that abandonment tore me up. Because I was ready to go with someone I had never met. And I felt so guilty that I was so quick to abandon my mother, who had always been there. Now, she hadn't been always great. You know, we were neglected and abused and struggled and went without, but she was at least there. This guy called up and said he was coming for me, and immediately I was thinking I was going to have a better life, that I was wanted, and I was ready to change allegiances that quickly, and then to be cast aside that quickly, it was a second abandonment. I didn't have his last name. Guess it's something passed down from my English grandparents. I was a bastard child. My parents were not married, so I had my mother's name. I was told I was a bastard very young, that I was not entitled to any kind of inheritance. So I spent the day with him, and at one point he took me to his mother's house, and I met my grandmother. And she asked me what I wanted, if I wanted money. And I didn't want money. You know, I just wanted family. I mean, I didn't look like my mom or my sister or my brothers. I didn't look like anybody in my mom's side of the family. And there I was, sitting at a family gathering of some sort, and the people looked like me. And for the first time, I looked like the people around me, but I still didn't fit in. And aside from a male cousin who said that I had just as much right to be there as anybody else, nobody else seemed to really want me there. I did get to meet my little sisters. I almost said their names. No, I'm not going to give names because of privacy issues. The young ladies are grown, so they're not the little ones I've seen. Odd thing was, to, I guess, entertain, my father put on home videos showing all the wonderful things he did for his daughters, that he stayed in their lives. You know, limousines and big parties, and it was kind of a rub in the face, maybe salt in the wound, you know. I wouldn't be there for you, but I was really there for them. Do okay, you know, thanks, I guess, happy for them, you know. Wouldn't want my sisters not to have it, you know, but I didn't really need to see it. It didn't help me any. I was hoping the girls were into art. They weren't, but that's fine. I just was looking for a connection. I reached out to one recently. Well, not recently. Maybe last year. And she never reached back. But that's fine. I mean, the girl doesn't know me. I was like that person that visited vaguely once, and odds are they don't even remember that day. I mean, out of all the days that they lived, that day probably wouldn't stand out. spent about 3 days with the man, and then he stopped returning my calls. And every once in a while I would look for him. I remember one time I tried to get him to answer my call, and I called him up and told him that I was pregnant. I think it was on Father's Day, just to get him to call me back. You know, to yell at me, call me names, something. Tell me I'm ruining my life. Tell me anything. And nothing. Of course I wasn't pregnant. I didn't even have sex until I got married, and I was 29. So that's, you know, I guess that's the upside to being asexual, is that I don't have to deal with that. I never struggled with sexual relationships at all. So I feel I'm blessed. People I've seen wreck themselves over that, and yeah, you guys can keep it. So that was a call from my father, and I felt like my father didn't have much of a choice at my birth. He was very young. He was a child. He didn't want anything to do with it. He didn't want any parental visitation. He didn't want any custody. He didn't want nothing. That's fine. Courts decided to take cash from him. That was not up to me. And personally, if I think a child has been conceived from a minor, they shouldn't have to pay child support. She was a grown person who knew what she was doing, and he was a child. That's just my personal opinion. And if I ever make it rich, I'd probably pay back his child support, because that's not right. That's predatory. But that's just my personal opinion of it. Children shouldn't be held to long term. They can't even sign a contract to work. They can't vote. They can't join the service. I mean, they can't even buy cigarettes. And he's going to be paying child support. It's ridiculous. So, but when he told me he was coming for me, he reached out to me. He made that decision. And when he called me and told me he was coming, that was a commitment to me. That was, you know, he didn't have to reach out to me at all. He could have thought about it and then decided not to do it, with never contacting me, and I would never have known. And I felt like that was harsh, and that I felt like he owed me something. I felt like he owed me some time, you know. When he stopped responding to me, and I lost his number eventually. I even lost a sketchbook I used to carry around with me that he did as a teenager. I carried that thing around for years. I let it go. Now, I did a DNA test with Ancestry.com. I was going to do it through 23andMe, but I think at the last minute, I just picked one, and it was the Ancestry.com. I did the DNA test because there was this story that my father was Apache. I was raised being told since infancy that I was half Apache. Almost half. And they said that my one grandfather was full-blooded, that my grandmother was half, that, you know, all my mother's stories. From what I understand, they had stories too. So there was like a deep yearning to connect with the Native Americans. And I always kept trying to reach. And I wanted to feel, oddly enough, like a whole person. I felt like I was just reflecting my mother. Since my father wasn't there, I felt like I was half of me missing. That I was only half a person. And that everybody treated me like I was my mother's clone. Like, she just one day spontaneously got pregnant all by herself. And I was just like a little extension of her. Good or bad. And so I was just looking for that other half of me. And I would cling to that identity. Tess came back. My parents originated from pretty much the same places. English, Scottish, Irish, and German. My mom's side has a little Swedish and Norwegian and a couple of small little countries over there. But basically, those four predominantly larger areas. I'm half English. My father's family was white. Crashed my identity. Grew up thinking I was half minority, half white, and then but I was really expecting, truth be told, I was really expecting to come up Mexican. Just because my sister had green eyes, and my brothers had blue eyes, and they had blonde hair, and they had the little freckles across the face, and they had the pale skin. And when I was little, my skin was darker, my eyes were much darker, and my hair was dark. And I looked like the neighborhood kids, because we lived in an area where predominantly they were Hispanic. And I was often asked if I was adopted. And my mom would tell them no, her father's Apache. My sister's biological father is French Creole. My brother's biological father is Sioux and French. I'm actually more white than they are. Go figure. But the thing that happened was I ended up connecting to a relative who connected to another relative. So I'm actually still in correspondence with the relative I met through a relative. So I've been corresponding with a relative on my father's side. My grandmother has passed away. My grandfather has passed away. So my father's parents are gone. My auntie on that side died very young. My father is married, I guess, again, and he's okay. You know, he has some health issues. I kind of hear about him distantly, and not often. I don't want the relationship I'm building with my relative to be about trying to get to my father. That connection to my father is gone. It's done, and that bridge is burned. I'm open, should he ever be ready, but I'm done begging for a dad to accept me. I've gone through several dads. I've had one dad die that same year. That Christmas. I had another dad die a couple years. I think it was 2005, 2006. He was about to turn 50. A month before 50. The other dad died at 44, which I've actually outlived one of my dads, which is trippy. So it's a roundabout thing. It was all about that call and that connection to that side of the family. And it's still something that to this day I'm conflicted over. You know, I wanted to belong. I wanted to be claimed. It's why I was so ecstatic when I got married and I was able to change my name to his name, to be claimed, for somebody to want to tell the world that I was theirs. And so now that I'm much older, now that I'm more settled in my individuality, that's not as important to me. But it was just the proudest and most happiest time was changing my name. And I was no longer the bastard and unwanted. You know? And so, well, that's pretty much it. You know? And I don't think I'll do a video about the foster care, how I ended up there, because pretty much don't want to cause trauma to anybody who's been through it, and I don't want to cause old wounds to open up for any relatives who might come across my channel. So no reason to cause more pain than that's already experienced. So, but the fact is, you know, it was only a couple years. It was painful and long at the time, but it wasn't our whole childhood. So, anyways, that is it. I'll talk about something lighter next time. Don't want to be depressing. Like, subscribe. You can leave a comment, and I will read it. And, hey, share my channel if you like it. Alright, talk to you guys later. Bye.